Welcome to the SALT podcast. If you're just joining us, we're on episode 5. I'm George Iskander. Joining me is my co-host, Simon Thomas Gilto, and we're very blessed to have Father Mark from St. Mark's Orthodox Church in Sydney. Welcome, Father Mark. Lovely to have you.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Simon.
So Father Mark's actually my confession father, so I have to make sure I take it easy because he's going to put it on me later. So as always, we like to dive into our guest a little bit in terms of your background, your early childhood, your family life, maybe when your family came, if they came from Egypt, when did you come? How was that kind of situation? So if you can give us a little bit of a background for our viewers.
Yeah, sure. I was I was born in Egypt, in Cairo. My family migrated to Australia, like many families, searching for a better life, mainly for their children. Like for those who migrated, it was often harder for them, but I think, with a vision for their children. And so my parents migrated to Australia in 1985. I was about 2.5 years old. We lived a lovely, simple, very happy life here in Australia. And we're so blessed and thankful to God for that.
Great. So what was your early school life like? Where'd you go to school here?
Yeah, I went to the local Catholic school, and then also a Catholic high school. It was the usual challenges of a little fob kid trying to integrate into Australian society. But we were blessed to have a wonderful time growing up here at school, and
Did you have a good friend group as well?
Yeah, look, I always sort of gravitated towards my friends at church. So I had a good friend group at school, but my church mates were always my go-to, and I think that was helpful growing up. When you have friends around you who are like-minded and have the sort of same vision in their life, and so that for me I think was really good.
Did you have any siblings?
Yes, I've got an older brother and I've got a younger sister. Yeah,
Middle child.
Middle child.
I was going to say.
I'm the same. No, I'm number 4 out of 5, but it's as middle as it gets. Yeah. My mum's got 5, and I was number 4, and I was the favorite, and then another one came along, and I was like, where's Simon again? So it worked out. Yeah. Your parents were obviously religious, I'm assuming. Growing up, when you came to Australia, were you always in church, as you said before?
Yeah, look, my parents were very faithful, and they implanted us in the church. Going to church on Sunday was a non-negotiable. That's what we do every single Sunday, and the usual in the home, a lot of time spent together as a family with the Bible, with prayer, house decked out with icons, the whole kit and caboodle. Yeah, so I was blessed to have that sort of influence in my life.
What was one thing you learned from your mum and one thing you learned from your dad?
Look, there's a lot of things I've learned from my parents. They are very special people, and I'll tell you an interesting fact about my parents that I haven't really seen much around. Would you believe me if I told you that I have never seen my parents fight?
Wow.
Really?
I've never seen them have an argument. Mm. I'm sure that they had, behind closed doors and whatever, but the fact that they were able in front of their children to always present a unified, loving front is remarkable.
Mm.
So I've learned a lot from them, especially reflecting back. Like growing up, it's just,
You don't realize.
You don't realize mum and dad, whatever, everything's sweet, But when you reflect back, especially when you're comparing it to how I am in my own home or those who I see in the church and the families that I visit, reflecting back, I've learned so much looking back at how they were functioning as a family. So I think one thing I've learned from each, I'd say, that self-sacrifice, that ability to always try to make the other person happy and comfortable, and
so important.
And my dad is the one thing that stands out to me is that nothing's about him. If you see with my dad, he'll never talk about himself.
Mm.
He's always interested in the person in front of him and learning from the person in front of him. And growing up, it was never about him. It was always about his wife or about his children or about his service in the church. Nothing was about him. And I think that level of that's very refreshing in this day and age. Like everyone's about themselves
and their own happiness and what they want.
Yeah. So living for others, I think, is a key that I've taken from them. Yeah.
And your mum?
My mum, she has this remarkable spirit of service, even till today. Service for her is number one. She bakes Christmas cookies and Easter cookies at church, and she would be there from 6 a.m. till midnight for months and months.
Wow.
I'm like, Mum, why are you really stretching yourself like that? She's like, we have to make sure that all the families have their cookies, and I'm like, who cares if they don't have cookies? Like, it's like they can buy cookies from anywhere. No. So the spirit of service, I've learned that from my mum.
Beautiful. So you've had a lovely, simple life, stable home environment, stable school life. At what stage did you kind of get more drawn to God in terms of taking your spiritual life to that next level, being more serious, or considering your spiritual life a lot more?
I think I still haven't taken my spiritual life serious, to be honest. I think
if that's the case, we're all doomed. I'm beyond doomed.
I'm still trying to take my spiritual life serious. I think that spirituality is a journey, and I don't think I've reached the point where I could say that I have taken it seriously. I think we need to continue to grow and continue to try to, as you say, take our spiritual life seriously and make it a real priority in our lives. So I'm still trying to, attain that. Yeah.
So do you find that it's harder now, being, a priest, being busy with kids and family and wife and service? Is it harder now to take your spiritual life seriously because, you got a lot more responsibility, or was it easier when you were younger?
No, look, I think, as a priest, we are blessed that we are forced to be in the church a bit more than the average person. It's like, if a normal working person would work 9 to 5 and go to church on a Sunday, and hopefully maybe one will do during the week if they're lucky, and a Bible study in the evening, and that would be great. But for a priest, they're blessed because we're forced to be in that environment more often than not. And so in being in the church to serve others, we ourselves are benefiting from that presence. And so there's a famous priest who once said that he believed he was called to priesthood for his own salvation. And I believe that to be true, that it makes life easier that you get to be in that environment more regularly. Yeah.
Actually, our last guest said something similar. They said the priesthood refines. So I think it was Father Elijah or Father Anthony that said that, but they were saying when we asked a similar question, they touched on that, and they said that they're learning through their priesthood and they're growing much more spiritually because the priesthood is like a lesson.
Yeah, look, I definitely would agree with that. When I was called to the priesthood, I shared with my confession father that this is something that's not possible because of all of my weaknesses. And that was his response. He said that entering into the priesthood will inspire you to take it to the next level, to not stay in those weaknesses. So you're right, that priesthood gives you that environment and that inspiration to take your spiritual life to the next level. Yeah.
Let's just escape priesthood for a minute, because we'll get back to that. I want to know about your earlier days. So before you became a priest, I'm sure you had a job. I'm sure you went to uni, TAFE, whatever the case may be, probably uni. But what were those days like? What were you studying? What were you doing for work?
Yeah, so I studied computer engineering at the University of New South Wales.
Oh, this guy's intelligent.
But those days were a real turning point. Well, not turning point, but I'd say a fork in the road of life, because when you finish school and you're entering the big wide world, and you got to make some decisions about your life. And for me, I left school with a real hope that I would enjoy life. Party at university, make new friends, live life, travel,
I like it.
Yeah. Kind of your scenes. But I went to university and I tried to make,
those type of
friends. But in engineering, you don't have those kind of people.
Definitely. He had the right idea, wrong plan.
So I couldn't really make those kind of friends that would suit that sort of
Did you
lifestyle.
try go out of your way to make those friends?
I did. I tried hard. But I ended up landing with a couple of Christian guys. from the church who were not into that stuff, but were more into spirituality. We're more into service at church, attending liturgy and praises. And so I got sort of stuck with them. And as a result of being stuck with them, it rubbed off on me over time. And so I think at that point, that influence in my life sort of helped me take the right direction. And so it's really important, I think, as young people that we surround ourselves with the people that we want to be more like, you know, the people that inspire us. If I want to be more spiritual, I need to be around people who are more spiritual. You know? If I want to be around people, if I want to be sort of more
on the fun side of things,
you'll do that. So
hang
you
around with
pick
those
the people you
people,
want to be more like.
Exactly right. You are who you hang around
Yeah,
with.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that had such an impact on you, and it's interesting that God kind of confined you to that and refined you through that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was a game changer for me. Yeah.
And then how did you transition to corporate life? You ended up getting a corporate job. What were you doing, and what was the work environment like?
Yeah. I worked as a management consultant firstly for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and then I moved on to IBM in a strategy role for IBM. I got to, I really enjoyed that time in the corporate environment. I traveled a lot for work all over the world, and that was a really great experience. But then that sort of all ended after a calling came. Yeah.
What was the struggles in corporate life? Because like my wife works in corporate in a bank, and there is a lot of like politics. There's a lot of kind of like if you're not social, you don't really get far because you need to join the social scenes in order to be seen by management, to be recognized. So how do you balance that? And was there a good Christian core, or did you create a Christian environment in your work?
Look, I think in all of our environments, we have to know who we are. And I think that helps us navigate the environments that we're in.
Very true.
Like if I know who I am a Christian, I am a son or daughter of God, that guides me in how I function. So even if I'm in an environment that is cutthroat, that is too focused on worldly things and of money and of pleasures and things like that, if I know who I am, then I can navigate through that. So I think that's important, that we know who we are and we know our limits. We have a young lady in our community who gave me a call once, and she told me that she entered a beauty pageant and she won Miss Australia. All right.
Wow.
And
I'm not going to refer her to Simon.
I'm not going to comment. Looked at me. Let him finish the story.
Sorry, I'm trying to be a wingman.
I know, but you heard Miss Australia, you went running. She could be Mrs. Australia. You never know. She could be married. Sorry, Father. Continue. Goodness gracious.
So she won Miss Australia. And then she told me, because she won Miss Australia, she gets to enter into the Miss Universe contest.
Oh, wow.
And that involved a trip to the United States, to New York, where she would compete for Miss Universe. And it was like a all expenses paid trip to New York. Imagine like what a dream,
Yeah, wow.
And she said, but I have a problem that I feel that the environment in New York will not be a good environment for me spiritually. So I'm thinking of pulling out. What do you think? I said, look, maybe we can make some, some rules around your trip, and we can maybe have a system where you pray each night and you can sort of protect yourself, and we can be in touch. And I tried to just sort of make it in a way where she can still, go for her goals, but by protecting her, from that environment. After a few days, she spoke to me and said, I've decided that I'm pulling out. I'm not going to go to New York. It's not worth me risking my Christian faith in that kind of environment. They even wrote an article about her in one of the news that the Miss Australia has pulled out of, and they had to go find the second place to take her spot. And that's just really inspiring, to prioritize your faith to that level, where sacrifices need to be made. And I think we need to do that daily in the environments that we're in. Whatever working environment we're in, we have to know who we are, stay within our limits, and prioritize our faith.
100%.
A lovely story, to be honest.
Wow. It reminds me of Father Anthony, actually. He had a chance to really take his career in soccer.
Illustrious career.
Illustrious career. Yeah, he was playing at the highest level of Australian soccer, but then the games were on Sunday. So it was a simple decision for him. He just said, my church is on Sunday, I can't. So he kind of limited his potential because he didn't want to affect his spiritual life. So
100%. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, what kind of spiritual struggles did you personally face growing up, or did you find? You know all my spiritual struggles, so thought we'd come on this platform.
We're trying to go one for one now.
Yeah.
No, look, I think we all share the same struggles, navigating through our life. And, I think there are just these key moments where we need to make the right choices and decisions. All throughout our life, there are choices and decisions to be made. But there are key moments where we need to make the right choices. When we're faced with temptation, making that right choice, when we're faced with a decision that will compromise our faith, we take the right choice. And our life is basically an accumulation of those decisions. And if we continue to make the right decisions, turning to faith, then we'll continue to grow. We all have the same struggles, we all have the same temptations, but it's about making those right decisions at the right moments that make the big difference.
Could I ask a private question, if that's all right, for my personal gain? When you're faced with a temptation where you know what's right, but you're more in love with the idea of not doing right, and it's very clear when you hear two voices, the devil and Jesus, you're hearing both of them. What do you do in that moment in time that really helps you try and steer the right way, as opposed to going into that temptation?
Yeah. Look, I'll tell you a concept that I think is important, which is transforming temptation to glory. Because it's not just a decision that, should I fall into this sin or this temptation or not? I'd rather look at it as, do I fall into this temptation or do I flip it to glory? So it's not like a bad or just
normal path.
A normal path.
Yeah.
It's a bad path versus a path of glory.
Can I have an example?
I'll give you something to think about. Think about the woman that came to Jesus when he was sitting with Simon the Pharisee, and she entered the room and she took the fragrant oil and put it at his feet. She took her hair, her tears to wash the feet of Christ. She took her hair to dry. Now that woman, we know, was a sinner woman. Which means that she used these things for sin. So she used the perfume to allure men. She used her hair for beauty. She used her tears, her emotion, to connect with men. So she's taken those same elements that were used for sin, she transformed them to be used for glory. She then took those same things, her emotions, and she washed the feet of Christ. She used that perfume, she broke it and put it at the feet of Christ. She took her hair and she dried the feet of Christ. So we take those same temptations and we transform them into glory. So let's say, for example, I'm tempted to use my money for a wrong purpose. Yeah. And then I have this moment, should I use the money for the wrong purpose or should I not? That's not the question. Should I use my money for the wrong purpose or should I take that money and give it to the poor? You know what I'm saying? So it's transforming what was about to be a temptation into a path of glory.
Instead of temporarily stopping doing bad, you're completely transforming it.
That's it.
Wow.
Another one. Let's say I'm thinking of watching something inappropriate, that I know is not good for me. Do I not watch it, or do I then go and watch this podcast?
It's a good idea. Watch the podcast.
The Soul podcast. So
Great transition.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Completely get you. Yeah. I never thought of it like that. I always thought the temptation comes, you're faced with right or wrong, but then now you're saying instead of right or wrong, take the wrong out of the way completely and shift your mind and balance into something else. It's like what Abuna, our father Yaub, said in the first episode. He goes, we need to completely shift our thought. We have to do something completely different instead of saying, I don't want to do this, because you're just prolonging it until the next time the devil wants to come and try and tempt you. So
Perfect.
Thank you for the perspective.
Thanks.
Yeah. So when you were called to be a priest, when did that start? How was it like your confession father bringing this up when you were younger? When did it kind of bring it up to you that it was something that was more real? Did they wait for you to get married? Like, you know what I mean? Because I know some priests are like, okay, he's going to be a priest, but we'll just wait till he gets a wife and then we'll take him. What do you reckon?
Yeah, look, I think, as you know, in the Coptic Orthodox Church specifically, priesthood is an invitation and a calling. So it's not something we sort of ask for or put our names forward for. It's something that you are called to. For me, I grew up with a spiritual father who you've had on this podcast before. His name is Father Jacob. And he was my confession father since the age of 10. And he never mentioned the word priest to me, throughout all my time growing up. But what he did, and this is back now me again looking back at how he formed and guided me, he always used the word consecration, right? So when I go sit with him, he'd say to me, well, tell me some good news. I'd say, oh, okay, good news. All right, yeah, I passed my exam at uni. I got a promotion at work. And I'd share good news that he's asking me for. Mm. And he would smile and say, "It's nice. This is nice, but nothing is sweeter than the consecration of life." I'm like, oh, all right, well, yeah,
whatever that means. I just got a promotion to the consecration of life.
Anytime I found that to be a regular theme. Anytime I would talk to him about anything in my life, worldly, this is nice. But nothing is like and sweeter than consecrating your life to Jesus. And so that's how he would talk to me. So when the actual calling came for consecration, I was prepared in that sense that nothing is sweeter than consecrating your life to God.
You planted the seed.
Yeah, and he planted it in a way that to understand that consecration is the highest calling, to give your life to Jesus, whatever that looks like. Yes, for me it looked like priesthood, but for others it's we're all called to consecration. I think if we have that motto in our mind that nothing is sweeter than consecrating your life to Jesus.
It's beautiful.
So was it a hard choice, or, I mean, of course it's a hard choice, but the reality of it when, for example, having you were married at the time, I don't know if you had children at the time, like the shift in terms of financially everything, like how did you kind of deal with that?
Yeah, so it was my 28th birthday. I was at church for a Bible study. And we had pizza after Bible study. And Father Jacob was the one giving us the Bible study. And he went to his office afterwards, and we were all eating pizza. And then I thought, we should take some pizza to Father Jacob. So I took a pizza and knocked on his door. I said, Father, would you like some pizza? We have some. He said, yes, come in. That was the worst offering I've ever had.
You gave him pizza, he talked about consecration of life.
But it's interesting that when I gave him that pizza and we sat down on my birthday, he didn't ask me to be a priest. He told me. He said, just letting you know, we've written to the Pope to organize for you to be ordained a priest.
No notice, nothing?
No notice, no questions asked. This is what's happening, all right? And so it wasn't really my choice. It just, I was told, I'll do what I'm told.
What was your first emotion then, other than pure shock?
My first thought was, this is my birthday, So
say it the next day.
So I automatically felt this must be a gift.
Of course, the best gift of all.
Yeah.
You were married at the time?
So we had been married for 1 year.
Okay, how'd your wife of 1 year feel about it?
Yeah, so that's what I said to him. I said, well, have you spoken to my wife about this? He said, we will speak to her. I said, all right, good luck.
Honestly, he must have known that you were an obedient son, because the way he approached you was just like, hey, this is what's happening. And he knew you weren't going to reject. So that's amazing. Yeah. So how did your wife take it, and what was the
No, look, I think for my wife, she'd only been married for 1 year. She was young. She was, 23. 23-year-old, been married for 1 year, being told, with no kids yet, being told your husband's going to be ordained a priest. So you can imagine there was shock, there was, you can't comprehend. It really threw a spanner in the works. And like most wives who are called, I think she really took time to understand what that would look like and how she could accept something like that.
So she obviously, by the sounds of it, was not super accepting of it, but so loving of you that she was like, whatever happens, it's God's will. So on that note, you said there was what, a 5-year age, a 4-year age gap or 6-year?
My wife?
Yeah.
6, yeah.
6-year age gap. So how did you go about finding your partner, and what were the qualities you looked for?
And what advice can you give to Simon?
The third part you don't need to answer, but it's up to you. Not every episode is finding love for co-host. Leave it.
Yeah, look, I met my wife at church, which I think is a great place to meet your life partner. I think meeting someone at church is a great thing because sharing what is most precious in common. Our faith is the most precious thing in the world. And so when you marry somebody, you want to share what's important to you. And so I think meeting at church is a great thing to do. And so I met her at church. I noticed her and tried to talk to her, and she didn't really give me much attention. So I just thought, okay, she's not keen, and just leave it at that. Then after 6 months, I'll give it another go. So hey, Gina, how you going? How's your week? She's like, yeah, good. So she wasn't giving me much.
Good. I gotta go.
Try to talk to her on Facebook, and just again, I've got to go, that sort of thing. So this went on for a few years.
Persistence.
Just trying and trying, and
First advice, persistence.
yeah, there you go, persistence. So then after a certain point, I said, look, I'm just going to drop this before I humiliate myself. And but then again, once I was having a chat to Father Jacob, and I was saying to him, look, there's this girl, Gina, and I'm just thinking of her, but she doesn't really give me much, attention. He said, look, I'll have a chat to her, I'll see what's happening. And at that time, there was another guy interested. And Father Jacob said to me, I'm going to test her. I'm like, okay.
This poor 22-year-old. Oh my God, she's getting tested beyond limits. Even if all the Jacob's involved now. Yeah. Sorry, continue.
He said, I'm going to test her. I didn't know what that meant, but I said, okay, go for it. If he's testing her, that's probably a good thing for me.
It's a good sign.
Yeah. So he went up to her and he told her, that guy that's interested in you, that's not from the church, you should go for him. And she's like, but he's not from the church. He's like, no, he's good. He's got a lot of money. He's successful. You'll have a good life, with him. Doesn't matter about the church thing. Maybe he'll come around a little bit later.
Wow.
You should go for him.
Unbelievable.
What a maverick.
Reverse psychology. This is unbelievable. God, they know what they're doing. Yeah. Sorry, continue. This is cinema now.
So she said, Father, I can't. I want to have a family that we go to church together. I want to raise my children inside the church. I don't want someone to ever block that for me. He said to her, that guy that's interested in you, I think you should go for him. You'll have a happy life. He's got a lot of money. He's successful. And he's not into the church. Maybe he'll come around a bit later. You should go for it. And imagine your confession father telling you that. And she said to him, I can't. I can't be with someone who I'm not confident that we will share a life of faith together. What if he doesn't want my kids to go to Sunday school, or I need someone who's faithful. He said, okay, good. I've got someone else for you.
In reverse.
Oh, he played it. He absolutely played it to a T.
So he helped me with that, and I think the church sometimes is helpful in these areas. Yeah.
But it's similar to, if you think about it, it's similar to what you wanted. When you were younger, you wanted to experience maybe that party life or that eccentricness. And then, eventually God just told you, no, I'm going to bring these 2 people, 3 people in your life. Same thing with her. She probably thought, okay, I want to be in the church, but I also want to date someone who's on the outside, this, that. And then when someone came to speak to her, then she started putting 2 and 2 together. Yeah. Not that I've ever met Gina in my life. Never met your wife, but it just sounds like that.
So what advice can you give, not just to Simon, but to anyone that's out there available and looking? What would you advise them in terms of how to take, if you're interested in someone, how do you take that first step?
Yeah. Look, I think first of all, for those who are in that stage of life, I think it's important to get your priorities straight in what's important to you, because nobody is perfect and has everything, but you need to pick for you what's really important to you. If faith is important to you, then try to find someone who shares that same faith as you, and then look and concentrate on people's values and their qualities. I think nowadays we are too focused on other things. I remember I once asked out a girl, and her response was, "You're too boring." Yeah. So sometimes we search for things like that. You just want just fun and outgoing and this and that, and or good looks, and but if we search for the things that are of value, if we prioritize those things, then we're able to narrow it down to someone who would make for us a good life partner, and to have the courage, to speak and to give things a shot, not to be too worried or overthinking or complex, but give things a go.
All right. What about the other side? Because I think in our community in particular, the girls kind of are in the waiting game. They kind of wait to be approached by someone. What would you say to a girl who's patiently waiting or might be interested in someone but doesn't know how to take a step? What about their side?
Look, I think definitely girls can take steps. It's just a different kind of step. Guys can take a step by being really direct, approaching a girl and saying that they're interested and maybe inviting them out for a coffee and things like that. If a girl does that, it may be taken wrongly by some people. So there's other ways they can do it, which is an indirect approach. For example, if a girl notices a guy and thinks that he may be suitable for her, then smiling at him a little bit more, stopping him and asking about his week and commenting about something that he did that is positive and having an inspiring conversation, So when the guy leaves that conversation, that experience of this sweet, smiling, inspiring girl is on his mind. So she has approached him indirectly, and that gives him the chance then to reflect about the option of this kind of a girl. So I think definitely girls can play a role.
How early in a relationship or in seeing someone should the couple go to their confession father, or their spiritual father, in a sense like that? Like, how early should the priest be involved in someone's relationship?
Look, I see the role of a priest as a coach through life, and as a friend, and so the sooner the better. Involving a spiritual father and guide in your life is one of the greatest things, assets you can have along your journey, and so there's nothing wrong in involving the priest really early on.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's not going to hurt.
Yeah.
So speaking about your wife, I want to ask you a personal question. So personally, as a husband, let's take off the priest hat and everything. As a husband, what challenge have you ever faced as a husband, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, look, I think as a husband, we are forced, once you are married. Sorry, Simon, this is your freedom's not going to last forever. But when you're married, like as a single man, like Simon, you get to live your life for yourself. It's all about you
to an extent.
When you're single, it's all about yourself. You get to do whatever makes you happy. You can wake up whenever you want. You can sleep whenever you want. Eat whenever you want. Go out and come and do whatever you want. There's this sense of I wouldn't call it freedom, but it's doing what I want to do at all times. Once you're married, and I think this is by design from God, that once you're married, you're then forced to not have everything about your own comfort and your own preference. And I think that's a pathway towards God's kingdom, because we can't enter the kingdom self-obsessed or everything about us. we have to enter the kingdom refined. We have to enter the kingdom selfless, with virtue. And so entering marriage, you're forced now to start considering other people, your wife before you, your children before you. So I think one of the biggest struggles is that transition where now I can't just do whatever I want to do. You know, I have to make sure that my wife is happy, my children are happy, you know, and that involves you taking a back seat.
Okay, and then extension to that, you're very blessed with 4 children. What is that like in terms of balancing? I have 2 children myself, and life is overwhelmingly busy with work and with children, and everything is quite stressful, and there's a lot of different routines and things like that. And if just one kid isn't sleeping, it could just ruin your whole week. So having 4 kids, how do you balance, you know, making sure you look after your wife, look after your kids, give them all individual attention, and, you know, your service for God, and then your own spiritual life?
Yeah, look, I think we all live very busy lives these days. You know, everyone's super busy with career and family and children and that. And so I think what's really important is that we make the moments that we have count. Yeah. So it's not necessarily about quantity, it's more about quality, you know. I can't spend the whole evening with just one of my children. I have to distribute amongst each of them and my wife and the service. And so what would need to happen is that the moments that I am with them, they really count. You know, if I'm putting them to bed, I can quickly run into bed, get into bed, cover yourself up, go to sleep, and walk out of the room. That's one approach. Or I could maybe jump in next to them, tell them a short story, read the Bible with them, give them a hug, a kiss, tuck them in, good night. That moment is really beautiful, you know. So you make those moments count. Maybe not much of it in terms of time, but the moments you do have with them, you make them count. And I think that's key.
Don't count the moments, make the moments count.
That's it.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah.
Wow, Simon, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
I just heard what he said. I just tried to. I just word for it.
All right. Okay. Well, on marriage as well, I had this question a bit later on, but I think I'll bring it up now. So, what are if I can have 3 parts of a marriage? I think there's intimacy, there's the emotional connection, and there's the spiritual connection. So, where would you rate those 3? And you know, sometimes being a busy parent, maybe intimacy sometimes might take a back seat when you're so busy, or the emotional connection might take a back seat, or the spiritual life. How do you prioritize, you know, making sure that your marriage is happy and healthy?
Look, I think all those 3 are critical for a happy marriage: spiritual connection, emotional connection, and physical intimacy. The unfortunate reality is that many people deprioritize all 3. Life gets busy, life gets stressful. And when life gets busy and stressful, often what gets hit the hardest is the relationship. The intimacy may slow down, the emotional connection, you're switched off. Spiritually, you're not investing time into it, you're burdened. But the reality is that these 3 are what's needed to navigate our busy, stressful lives. You know, so it's interesting that we let the busy, stressful life affect those 3, but actually those 3 are what strengthens us to navigate the busy, stressful life. You know, if I'm going through a lot of problems and stresses in my life and we're busy, but I have a strong emotional connection with my partner, then that's a source of strength. And spiritually, we are strengthening each other. That's a source of strength. Intimacy is bringing us together in a very real way. That's a source of strength. So what I would say is, rather than taking out our problems and our stresses on our partner and pushing them away, cleave to them for more strength. And so I think we just need to be a bit more intentional in our marriages, that we are investing in those areas. We're taking the time out to really connect. We are spending spiritual time together. And we get into a very regular routine of intimacy, because that helps also strengthen the marriage, express the love in a very real, tangible way.
So would you say all three are on par, or you would say if you focus on something that will lead to the rest?
I don't think you can prioritize them. I think they all have to be there
concurrently
as a package.
Yeah.
You can't say, okay, we'll be spiritually connected, but we're going to stop intimacy. You can't say, let's just do intimacy, but stuff spiritual. No, it's all the three of them are essential ingredient for a strong, happy marriage.
Okay, and leading on to that, there's a lot of divorce coming up, especially recently. Even in our community, it's kind of become more common. Why do you think that is, and how can, say there's a couple that is really struggling and feels like that might be an option or seriously considering it, what would you say to them, and can they kind of backtrack and bring their relationship back so they don't go down that path?
Look, I think sometimes we need to sort of reevaluate what love is, what marriage is, and that sometimes can help us navigate these kinds of decisions. I think love is not necessarily a feeling. I think love is more like a decision. And so when we love someone, we're deciding to love them, and we're deciding to sacrifice for them and to live for them. Yeah. Some people say, I just don't love them anymore, or I've fallen out of love, or that's the wrong use of love. Love is a decision, and so is marriage. It's a decision to lay down your life for another, for all eternity. And that's why our Lord Jesus Christ said that what God has joined, let no man separate. Of course, there are exceptions to that when someone is in danger, is in threat. There's some sort of abuse. There's been hurt by adultery. Of course, there are exceptions where divorce actually is acceptable and may even be for the protection of parties involved. So there are always cases where it's legitimate. But for just the situations where I'm not feeling it, or there's no better options out there, or that sort of stuff is where we need to reevaluate how we view love and how we view marriage as a decision, as a sacrifice, and to continue to invest in that decision that we made.
So a couple right now on the fence on that path thinking, hey, I don't think it's going to work. What would you say to them right now?
Of course, if there's no factors like
no, everything is safe. And
there's no
safe
there's no danger.
There's no abuse.
No proximity of danger.
Yeah. There's no abuse. Just not feeling it. I think we need to sort of first of all get a bit of help, and I think getting help from the church is a great place to start, or Christian marriage counselors. But getting some help. Sometimes we need a bit of help. We need a bit of guidance. So there's nothing wrong in reaching out to a priest, to a Christian marriage counselor, with the clear intention that I want to make this good. Sometimes people are switched off from the process, but if you both want to make this better, then the church can help to, as you said before, to bring spirituality back into the marriage, to bring the emotional connection back, to start again the intimacy. All of these elements we can revive in our marriages with a bit of help from the church, and of course seeking God's presence in that with a sort of understanding of what marriage is, this decision that we've made to love each other. Yeah.
I want to just backpedal a little bit off marriage, because we've had a marriage talk for about 12 minutes now. For someone who is yet to find their partner for life, what would you say? Because I always have this topic with my friends, and it's always different answers, but one sort of similar answer. What are 3 non-negotiables that you should be looking for in a partner?
Yeah. Look, I think for each person they have their list of priorities.
Absolutely.
But I would say first non-negotiable is someone that shares the same faith as you. Faith is number one in our life, and our belief in life with Christ is the most important. So having someone who can share that journey with you and that goal, because life is going to end towards God's kingdom, and it's a journey towards God's kingdom. So if I'm on this journey towards God's kingdom, I want someone to accompany me on this journey. It's like if you have a goal that you want to travel the world, and then you choose a partner who hates traveling. You're gonna be miserable. All my life I want to travel the world, and now you hate traveling. What am I going to do now? I'm going to go by myself. I'm going to go by myself. I'm stuck. I can't go. So it's lose-lose. I can't do that. I can't do the traveling, and I don't want to stay here. Saying that our goal in life is to travel towards God's kingdom, and I need someone to join me on that journey. So I'd say that's the first non-negotiable. Okay. The second non-negotiable is really simple, that I'm with someone who makes me happy, who inspires me, who brings the best out of me. Yeah, I don't need the best looking person in the world. I don't need the funniest person in the world. I just need someone who makes me happy. Yeah, who sees the value in me, who inspires me to be the best that I can be. The third non-negotiable is that I would say is someone who shares lots of respect and love and never puts me down, because marriage is all about respect. And so if I'm with someone who hurts me or puts me down, who abuses me, I can't accept that. So someone who always shows respect. Easy.
Beautiful answer. Very easy for you, yeah. We've been discussing it for months.
Yeah. Okay, so as your time as a priest, was there ever a time that you felt lost?
Yeah, look, I think I always feel a little bit lost. You know, I think that I think that's okay to always feel a bit lost, because that's when God's with us the most. You know, when we feel like we've got our life all sorted, I'm in control, I know what I'm doing, top of my game, then arrogance can slip in. And if arrogance slips in, then there's no place for God to work. God works with those who feel lost, who feel inadequate. There's a beautiful story in the Bible of Gideon. Gideon had a little small army, and he was taking on a big army. Kind of like Australia taking on America, you know. And you know what God said to Gideon? He said, you got a problem with your army. He didn't say your army is too small. God said to him, your army is too many. It's like saying to Australia, your problem, you can't take on America, you got too many soldiers. Like, that makes no sense. Yeah. But God says to Gideon, your army is too big, although it was very small. And the reason he said that to them, he said, lest when you win, you think victory has come from you.
Wow.
So God made Gideon reduce his army further and further and further until it was tiny. Then he said, now you can go to battle, because when you win, you'll know it's God that brought you the win.
Wow.
Yeah? And so God works like that in our own life. When we feel lost, when we feel that we're insufficient, we've got big battles to take on and it's all too much, that's when God shows up, because we know that the win, the glory will be from him.
It's very counterintuitive to what the world teaches us, because the world is always like, you have to be confident, you have to be, manifest it or see it or visualize it, and you can do everything and empower yourself. But very similar to what Father Jacob said, he's like, it's in your weakness. When God sees your weakness and you come to him and say, I'm weak or I can't, you need to do it, that's when you get the most strength, because he's the one that comes and carries you and carries the situation.
100%.
Okay, I think now we've got to know Father Mark quite well. So I think we can dive into a few topics now. So a few topics that have come up is about how can a young man remain pure?
Yeah, look, I think that's probably a key question for many young men is the quest for purity. I think that we live in a world where it's getting harder and harder to maintain purity. But if we really have that as a goal, then God gives us the ability to be pure even in difficult circumstances. There's a verse in the Bible that says, where sin abounds, grace abounds more. And so God gives us, as young men, the grace that we need to remain pure. We just need to want it. we need to call upon the Lord for support to remain pure. And like I said before, to know who you are, to live who you are. We shouldn't just be Christians just by name, but we should walk it, and be real about who we are. And so if we really have that goal for ourselves, we ask the Lord for support, and then we walk that, What's your thoughts like, your own experience and, from what you've seen around? And
I think for me, actually part of the reason why I wanted to do the podcast so much is because I find that social media is like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a seeding ground for a lot of sin, because you could just be watching some NBA clips and then you just swipe up and something comes up and that isn't a trigger. So what I was hoping to do with this podcast is actually flood the feed a little bit with some spiritual content, because the more spiritual content you consume, the more your feed kind of picks up on that and there's more spiritual content.
Absolutely.
So definitely social media, I always saw it as such a weapon that the devil uses, but there is an opportunity for it to be like a tool that God can use. And I think, if you're on social media and you're a young person, like follow the SALT podcasts, follow, the church pages, the youth pages. There's a lot of really great Christian pages. And the more you're on those kind of pages, your feed's just going to completely change. And then you just, if something's going to come up regardless, you just say uninterested, and then it keeps your feed pure. And I think, not always you're looking to fall. And I think, it's not like you're always searching for it, but it could very easily come up while you're just, carrying on with your business, and then that could lead you to sin. So that's my take.
And to bounce on your point, I think the important thing is never thinking that, like you said, you're doing anything on your own, because the moment you do that is when the devil can strike you at most, because it's you in your mind versus the devil, when in reality we are nothing but a small speck of dust in God's almighty hands. And when we have that belief that He is with me no matter what, and it's not me, then I think that's when you're able to combat these things and you're able to try and push forward. Don't get me wrong, I'm a sinner just like the rest of them, just like every single other person in their own lives. But I feel like in my past experiences, when I feel as though I have accomplished something or everything is from me, then that's when I feel the lowest, to be honest, because nothing in life does come from us. Anything, good, bad, it comes from God, and it's up to our discernment to understand whether or not where we can go with things. So it's not to go on a tangent, but never give any credit to yourself. No matter what you do, no matter how you do it, everything comes from God.
Well, they say pride always comes before the fall. So anytime you kind of have that strength to yourself and say, oh, look, I've been good, I've done this, that's when I feel that you're more susceptible to falling.
Yeah. When you were talking, George, you reminded me that there's a monk who's on TikTok and that and Instagram, and I said, oh, how is it that like you're a monk and you're on these social media? Don't you like come across bad things online? And he said, no, I train my social media. I go, what do you mean you train it? He goes, I ensure that I slow down on the spiritual feed so it knows that I like spiritual things. If something wrong comes up, I quickly remove it. So I've trained it that it only now gives me spiritual things. So maybe we can train our social media.
Yeah, of course. That's a great idea.
Of course, he's a monk and he's very much with himself and God. But I feel like in this day and age, everything everyone wants is quick. That's why the videos that can be the most popular thing are 5 seconds long, 2 seconds long, because we have such a short attention span. We just want to see everything quick. So thank God our listeners listen to a 2-hour podcast, but it's for good reasons. Our guests are amazing.
So staying on the purity concept, what is the problem with pornography? Why is it so damaging? And what kind of long-lasting effects can that have on somebody who's kind of exposing themselves to that?
Yeah, look, George, I'd say, being a priest, the number one problem I see stems from pornography. The biggest issue causing problems in the lives of young people and in marriages is pornography. This is no longer just a spiritual war. It's a war that every person may be facing in their life. And we have to sort of face it and take it seriously because, as you say, there's so many damages that it's causing for us. The first thing, I was actually watching recently another podcast with a professor of psychology from university who said that one of the biggest issues with pornography is the fact that it plays around with our dopamine levels in our brain, which trigger the fact that it is so addictive. It floods the brain with dopamine. Dopamine is the reward system of the brain that allows us to experience sort of a pleasurable feeling, but it's used for areas of our life that require reward. For example, working and being accomplished, going to the gym for a 1 hour session and feeling good after that. That's dopamine, yeah? And she was saying that, as you said, Simon, the brain has become adjusted to wanting quick releases of dopamine all the time.
Absolutely.
Whereas it wasn't designed by God for that. It was designed to reward us for hard work. It's a natural pleasure system. So the things that when I work hard, spend time with my children, I feel happy about that. When I work an 8-hour day and I leave my work and I've done great work, I feel happy about that. You know, I've done a long workout and I feel happy about that. But when I've messed it up with quick releases of dopamine, like that comes from any form of addiction, gambling, alcohol, drugs, pornography, then it ruins the way that God has designed our minds. We no longer actually enjoy the natural pleasures of life. We don't feel it anymore, you know?
Become numb to it.
And so when you become numb to it, you don't want to work hard for anything. You want everything to come to you really easily. So it actually has impact on our whole life and on the things that we're accomplishing, because all our brain has become wired to do is just receive that quick hit really fast with excessive levels that numbs everything else.
Exactly.
Then when we're faced with any problem, any stress in life, it becomes the go-to. Because how do I escape whatever problem I'm in? Let me go to whatever's just going to release that dopamine really fast, really hard. I don't go to the right sources for healing or for stress relief. I don't spend time with my family that give me that joy, or my wife that gives me that joy, or my partner. I go to pornography. You know? So then you disengage from the things that you should be engaging with, and you're engaging with something that is just continuously damaging you. The impacts, there are so many. This is one. Another is it actually damages real intimacy in a marriage, because you've developed an expectation of what intimacy looks like, which is not real. And so when you come to experience real intimacy, this is not really how I expected it was going to be. This is not really that sort of enjoyable. She's not doing this, he's not doing that. And then some partners can then lose interest in real intimacy.
Become resentful.
That's right, yeah. So I think it's a dangerous path to take. It changes how we view women. I think it's very degrading to women. We should look to all humanity as children of God, as daughters of Christ. But if I'm continually exposing myself to seeing women subjected in this kind of way, then how do I view women? It changes the way it gives us a horrible lens to view women. And so on many levels, pornography is the biggest disaster that has hit our generation. And I think we all have to stand up against this and reclaim the natural, beautiful pleasures that God has given to us. We pray for God's grace. We need it.
Not an easy answer, but what are the steps people can take to try and... Of course, you're not going to maybe stop an addiction that's been there for a while, but steps in order to slowly creep away from it.
Yeah,
how can
similar
we
question to what
do
I had.
that?
Exactly.
Yeah, look, this professor of psychology, she offered one starting point, which she said that you need to start fasting from it, because what happens is the brain has developed an addiction, and so each day and each time you are stressed It's like a trigger that I need that now. And so she said that we need to rewire our brains. And to rewire the brain, we need to be fasting from it for a good period of time. When we fast from it, the brain then starts to readjust. Obviously I'm not technical, but she said the brain starts to readjust. And then we train the brain to search for natural pleasures. So when I'm stressed, I'll spend time, go for a walk with my wife. When I'm stressed, I'll go do a gym workout. When I'm pressured, get on my knees and pray, attend a liturgy. So I'll do the things that are training my brain to get the comfort and the happier feeling and the strength from the right sources. So we slowly move away from the damaging, addictive behaviors that we can get ourselves into. Then we're in a much stronger position because no longer is it an addiction, it just becomes a temptation. So we want to move away from the addictive phase into just the temptation phase. It will always be a temptation as long as we're alive. That stuff is always going to be a temptation because it is a quick form of pleasure. But if we at least move away from the addictive phase into the temptation phase, when we're in a stronger position spiritually to always be able to say no, no, and to put things in place to help us. There's that book, Atomic Habits. And one of the things, examples he uses to develop a good habit is to make it easily accessible. And he uses in the book the example of apples. He says that his doctor told him he has to eat more apples. So he'd buy apples, he'd put it in the fridge drawer, and he would just never eat the apples. And then they go off, and he chucks out the apples. So he said, I made one change. Instead of having the apples in the fridge drawer, I put it in a fruit bowl on the bench. So when I walk past, I see the apples. It's one grab and he starts munching them. Gets through the apples. So when they're hidden away in the fridge drawer, it's not in sight. It's not coming to mind. It's a harder step. Open the fridge, open the drawer, grab the apple. Too many steps. But to develop that habit, he made it easily accessible. One grab, off you go. And so the opposite is true. If I want to stop a habit, I've made it harder to get to. Not too easy. Very simple things we can do. We can put certain blocks. Even like, let's say, Instagram becomes a source of problem for me. Let's get a blocker, block Instagram on my phone. Yes, I can go and unblock it, but it's a few clicks away and a bit of a process, and it gives me time to think, is this really going to be worth it? No, get back out. Yeah.
Well, Father Jacob actually said something similar. He said, don't resist the temptation, but replace it. So I think a lot of us sometimes feel like we want to be in the position to resist because it makes us feel like, oh, yes, I resisted. But don't be so proud in that sense, like actually escape and replace it with something else. Because if you try and, who's going to stand there and resist? Don't stand in the resistance.
Fall back to pride. Yeah. I want to say I did it. I overcame it when reality we're nothing.
Yeah.
So how can we bring this conversation up to our kids? Because, and I think it's good that I think your oldest is 12. So I think maybe you may have even had a discussion like this. But what I worry about, my kids are still quite young, 5 and 2. I never want to expose something to the kids that they don't know about or, plant ideas into the head. Because I'm just thinking if I ever bring something like this up, it might actually bring curiosity on board. And so how do we bring it up to kids so that they're aware and they know what's right and what's wrong, but we don't kind of open a door that you don't want to open?
Yeah, so I think we can teach our kids in general terms, not specifically about pornography as such, but in general terms that online, actually in all of life, there are, with every new technology, there are positives and negatives. There is good content and there is harmful content. And so teaching our kids that whenever we're online, we have to be really careful what we're doing online, just to make sure that we're not getting anything harmful. And there are different kinds of harmful things online. And so if we begin that way while they're younger, then they're just aware that there's a phrase I like to use, which is select and reject. So with everything, they have to select what's good and reject what's bad. And so we can teach them these simple things. Anything that you're doing in life, you have to select and reject. If something bad that you know is going to be bad, you reject that. So they can begin understanding these kind of general principles. And then as they're a bit older, it can be a bit more direct when they know what you're talking about. So we can start with just simple things: select and reject.
Now, I want to ask you a question, steering away from pornography, but more so to someone who goes about their life every day and understands the concept of God, but doesn't really want to sort of go into it and believe it as much. So what would you say to someone who doesn't believe or doesn't want to believe necessarily? Because I find in our videos that we post onto social media, there are people that say, yes, I believe, but I don't really see why I should. I don't understand this. And they're making steps in the right direction, but there's just something that's holding them back. What would you say to people who suffer from that?
Look, first of all, I think nobody doesn't believe, I think everyone believes in something. Even atheism, in a sense, is believing. There's a book titled Not Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. So I would say to someone who doesn't believe, I admire your belief, because the reality is it takes more faith, it takes more belief to believe there's no God. It's more of a stretch.
Because you're actually having to do research and you actually have to try and disprove a point sometimes.
It's impossible to comprehend that this sophisticated, organized universe came about by total chance. That requires a lot of faith. If I tell you today that basically I'm going to flip this table over and this cup of water is going to land exactly perfectly straight, these microphones will re-land in their exact spot, you'll say to me, you're crazy. So it requires more faith to believe there's nothing. It's more of a stretch. So it's easier for me to believe that there is a God. We can see it from nature. We can see God's fingerprints everywhere. Just look around. I think first of all, we have to be real and understand that everyone has a belief. It's easiest to believe in the truth. It's the easiest belief. Because the truth, it smacks you in the face. It shines forth. The truth of Jesus is beautiful. And the story of Jesus is like no other story you've ever heard in the world. The greatest love story in the world. When the truth, and you seek the truth, you will find the truth. And it's the easiest path to believe.
If you could sit with Jesus for 5 minutes, what would you say or ask him?
Oh,
I know that one. I felt like that one of all questions, he'd actually think and it stumped him a little bit.
It's the exact question I was about to ask.
It's the second time now. So take your time. You can think.
Look, I think I would probably. I'd be speechless, obviously, in front of Jesus.
Not for 5 minutes, all right?
But I would want to know if he's happy with me, because I want to be with him for all eternity. And so I would want to know from him, am I on the right path? Am I on the right path to spend eternity with you? I would want to make sure, when Simon Peter had that conversation with him after resurrection, and Jesus said to him, Simon Peter, do you love me? And he said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. I want to make sure that God really believed that I loved him and I was loving him in the right way, That we can have that encounter, every day in prayer. We can have that encounter. We can seek the Lord's feedback in our life and reflect.
Yeah. So on that point, what I wanted to touch on was you mentioned something like you wanted to see if you're on the right path with Jesus. There are a lot of kind of Christian denominations that would find that very shocking, because they're like, you should know that you're saved instantly. And, I've had a lot of discussions with people like that where they say, do you know that you're saved? I said, well, yeah, I mean, God offers me salvation, but I need to play my part, and I need to, not that anything that I can do is going to lead me to my salvation, but it's kind of like he's stretched out his hand to me and I got to grab it. But there are a lot of religions or denominations of Christianity that kind of just say, no, it's the craziest thing is that you should even question for 1 second. So what would you say to someone like that?
Yeah, look, I think the questioning is not from God's side. It's from our side. I never question God's salvation. I never questioned that that's offered to us. Definitely, God has come down to earth in Jesus, has given his life, has shed his blood to offer salvation. He has come to take on my punishment and my sin upon himself so that I can be saved. These are facts.
Non-negotiables.
Non-negotiables from God's side. The variable is not God's side, it's me. I can accept that or I can reject that. I can walk that path or I can deviate from that path. And it's not in a moment. It's not a moment's decision. It's a life. It's a journey. In any journey, you can go off the path. And so while some people say that salvation is earned in a moment, the moment you believe, yes, it's earned in that moment as you accepted Christ and his salvation. But you need to continue to walk that journey, that path. I can step off it at any time. And so to our last breath, we need to be begging God that we remain on that path. That's simple as that.
Is it ever too late to come back to Christ?
The story of the thief on the right hand of Christ when he was crucified really gives us insight into that. He was obviously living a sinful life to the point that he deserved his punishment. But he turned to Christ in his last breath and said, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And the Lord said, "Today you'll be with me in my kingdom." So we get insight that it's never too late. On our deathbed, we can be accepting Christ. However, we shouldn't take too much.
Literally, yeah.
Well, no, we shouldn't take too much comfort in that because as we get older, we can grow cooler and harder. We can't rely on the fact that on my deathbed I'll be ready to accept Christ. Accept him now, in the moment that we have, with the energy that we have. We give God the best of our days, the best of our years. Not, when I get older, I'll go to church. Or, when I'm like, whatever, I'll start taking it seriously. You're giving him the leftovers of your life. You never give a king the leftovers. You give him the very best. And that's why in the Bible it says, remember the Lord your God in the days of your youth, not in the days of when you're an old man or an old lady. Remember him in days of your youth, at the time of energy and passion and emotion and zeal, and give God those days. Don't rely on the fact that he'll accept me later when I'm older. Start now.
I was listening to a podcast where one of the hosts was Hindu, and they were having a Christian discussion. And what his concern about Christianity was, he found it unbelievable that Jesus can accept anyone, even if they're a pedophile, even if they're a murderer, even if whatever, as long as they come to him, then he's accepting them. But somebody, for example, that could live a very good and virtuous life but just doesn't have Jesus could end up in hell. So that contradiction to him was like, okay, so how can God accept people that have done physically so much bad and so much evil, but in the last moment they say, "Oh, I love you, Jesus," and then they're in heaven, and then someone who's lived their whole life virtuous, looking after the poor, serving people, but just didn't have Jesus, how can they miss out? What would you say to that?
Yeah, look, I think that it goes back to the Lord's compassion and mercy. One of the attributes of God is compassion, and so when Jesus came, if you're looking through Scripture, you'll find that the word compassion appears 9 times in the New Testament. And each of those times, it's referring to Jesus or in a parable about the work of Christ. And so Jesus came to show God's mercy and compassion to mankind. This is the definition of Christianity. And so, yes, it can be shocking that God would accept someone who's lived a bad life all of their life. It is shocking. The fact that it's shocking makes it even more beautiful, because we have a Lord who is so compassionate, so merciful, and always waiting for us to come back. There are so many parables in the Bible. For example, the parable of the prodigal son. You have a father just sitting there waiting for the return of his son. The son himself, in the parable of the prodigal son, lost hope. He actually said to himself, I'll go back and I'll tell my father, I'll come back. I know you can't take me back as your son, but just take me back as one of your workers, in your house. But the father wasn't like that. The father said, no, you come back as my son, and celebrates his return. And so that's the reality of the Christian God. That's the reality of Christ. I actually had a Hindu mate that I went to university with. We were really good mates, and he was, had a great time at university. And after we finished university, we sort of went different ways and hadn't seen each other in a long time. And then I bumped into him many years later. And we were, oh, how's life? What have you been up to? This, that, He's like, oh, look, I've had a really tough run. I got married and I made some mistakes, got divorced, and now I've just been, really miserable. I don't know how to sort of let go of the shame. And I spoke to him about the concept of forgiveness. I said, why are you holding on to the shame? There is forgiveness for your mistakes. He said, no, we don't have forgiveness. Like, what do you mean? He said, no, you live with the consequences of your mistakes, and it comes back to you in your next life. The Hindu belief. And I spoke to him about the forgiveness that Jesus offers, that Jesus came to give us forgiveness, to give us new life, to wipe away, to take away the shame, took upon himself to give us a new chance, a new start, a new life. He really struggled to comprehend that. And we as Christians, we talk about that, we're so used to that kind of language. But for someone who hasn't understood that, they struggle to comprehend it. But that's the power of Christianity, is that it grants new life to us. Christ himself took the punishment and took the shame so that we don't have to hold on to it anymore. We become liberated, become free. Imagine you could live your life like that. You live free. That's that's the gift of Christianity.
So what would you say to the flip side of, what if you lived a good life but didn't know Jesus, and then you don't end up in heaven, for example? That's the flip side that they take. What would you say to that?
Well, I think these matters of judgment are in the hands of God. He knows how to judge every human, whether there are exceptions or no exceptions, or, all we know is that salvation comes through Jesus Christ. And that's the path we need to seek in our life. How God will judge all humanity, that's for him to do and to know. It's outside our scope. All we can do is attach ourselves to the source of our salvation, which is Jesus Christ.
So I heard a take on that, which is like, Jesus is never going to impose himself. If you lived your life without him, why would you want to go to heaven and spend your life praising him? So heaven probably isn't where you want to be if you've spent your whole life not wanting to know Jesus.
Yeah, it is definitely a relationship with Christ.
So this next segment, I want to do an advice from Father Mark. So a few people that I want you to give advice to. The first one is husbands. What's your number one piece of advice?
I'll tell you a little story that when I was getting married, I went to my spiritual father, Father Jacob, who we've mentioned a few times, and I asked him that same question. I said, Father, I'm getting married, and give me your top piece of advice. And he's a very wise, profound person. I was expecting like a blow-away kind of piece of advice.
Probably said just stay quiet.
It was actually pretty close. He said, okay, my number one advice is when you come home in the evening and you're hungry and she's made no food, don't comment.
Spot on.
That was his advice, right? I was like, that's your advice? That's the number one piece of advice?
He would have been dumbfounded. This is what I'm getting told now. Talking about food.
But I can't tell you the number of times that has played back in my mind. Not just about...
in everything.
In everything. Not just about the meal, but it's not about you. You have no right. You have no right to a meal cooked for you. You have no right to clothes washed for you and your shirts ironed. You didn't marry a slave. Yeah, you're entering marriage to serve another person, to sacrifice your life for the other person. You have no right for anything. So never open your mouth about anything. Food doesn't taste good. There's no food. Where's my clothes? Where's this? No, you're there to serve. You're there to serve your wife and to serve your children, and don't open your mouth about things.
Wow.
You know? And I think that's top advice for men is to know your role. Don't expect anything. Don't make comments.
Okay, advice to dads.
Don't comment either. Any man, don't comment.
Just don't talk.
Just stop.
Advice to dads, I think, connect with your children. You know, I think a lot of people are busy, dads busy chasing dreams and pursuing business and career and we're not present enough with our children. We need to be present. We need to be connected, to be close to our children. That connection from a very young age. There are so many statistics out there now that the first 5 years are very formative, the first 10 years, and the whole character is already formed. And so in these younger years where young fathers are busy, they're not forming their children. So I think number one advice to dads is be close, prioritize and spend time with your children, connect.
Advice to wives.
I'll ask it just in case you get in trouble. What's your advice to wives?
You know, there's a piece of advice in the Coptic Orthodox wedding ceremony, which says to women, again, it sounds a bit odd, but I think it's also a game changer, is do not frown in his face. Now, that's one of the pieces of advice in the ceremony, you know, officially. Do not frown in his face. Again, if you think about that practically, when your husband walks through the door and you smile,
It's big.
it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It sounds so simple, but it's beautiful. You walk through the door and your wife smiles to you, and maybe a hug and a kiss.
Do you guys comment after that? Or another comment? Just so I know.
It sets the tone
course.
for the whole day, for the
100%.
whole evening.
100%.
You know, so just smile to him, make him feel cherished, respect. You know, a smile, a hug, and a kiss shows a lot of love and respect. So I would say top tip to wives is know that men are simple. They just want to see you happy and smiling, and to show them a lot of respect. Men need to be respected. When I frown in their face, like, are you serious? Like, and I'd roll my eyes and I was shaking my head, like, you know, the men feel disrespected. When men feel disrespected, they don't feel like men, because the number one need for a man is to be respected. And if my wife is disrespecting me, I don't feel like a true man. So enable your husband to be a man by respecting him. You'll see the best that will come out of him. Smile, a kiss, a hug, and not frowning. You bring the best out of your husband.
I love that. Beautiful. What about to mums?
Mums are the backbone of a family.
Definitely.
And I think to mums is know the role you are playing with your children is powerful. You know, the love, the tenderness, the emotional connection that you are playing in your home is critical. Never let anything get in the way of that. So I would just say to mums, you have a calling, and never lose that sight of that calling. You know, so yeah.
And then what's your advice to parents on how to raise kids knowing right from wrong and being engrossed in the church?
Yeah, look, I think the best thing we can do as parents for our children is to raise them in the church. I think to, embed them in the church. Make Sundays sacred. Like, make Sunday as it ought to be, the Lord's Day. You get up as a family, you all get dressed nicely, and you head to church nice and early as a family. And then living out the rest of your week, taking opportunities to talk, to embed the Christian values into the lives of the children. Yeah. So if every night as a family we get together and pray and read the Bible, we have an opportunity to talk. Talk about the Bible and how it can be applied at school and how it can be applied in their life. So the kids are growing up learning that, first of all, church is the most important thing in the world. It's a non-negotiable. We go as a family, and then the Bible and prayer is guiding our life, and the Bible is being applied to their life. I have two mates who are priests. I grew up with them, Father Daniel and Father Paul. Yeah, they're brothers, and they're both priests. And there's only 2 boys in the family. So, and then their dad.
You were destined to be a priest. Just your group of friends is all priests.
They're all mates of priests. And then their dad is also a priest, Father Michael. So you have Father Michael has 2 boys, and they're both priests. Okay, Father Daniel and Father Paul. So once I was having a chat to Father Michael and their mum, Mona. Okay, and I was talking to Father Michael and Mona. And I was saying, look, your 2 boys became priests. Your two kids consecrated their life to God. What would you say happened in that house, in your house, to create an environment where 100% of your children are consecrated to God? And then Father Michael very humbly said, "Oh, it was all their mother."
Yeah, he didn't comment.
Yeah,
He was smart. I can already tell he was smart.
He knows.
He didn't say a word.
He was like, "Oh, it was all their mother," And I said, "Okay," So and then Mona goes, "No. I will tell you." She said, every night, their dad sat with them to read the Bible, and every night he explained how to apply the Bible in their life. That's it. That was her, explanation of how that happened. And so I think as parents, if we embed them in the church and then in the home, we have that opportunity to spend time with them with the Bible, we'll raise very strong Christian young men and women.
Absolutely. And last one before George moves on to another segment, what's your advice to someone who feels, maybe not necessarily a guy, but a woman, who feels rushed because of their age and wants to get married? Wants to rush to get into a relationship. What's your advice to someone like that? Man or woman, obviously.
Yeah, look, I think it's fair that, many of us desire to be in a good, loving relationship. But approach it with faith. Approach it with faith and with patience, because we believe that God will guide us to the right person at the right time. We don't know what's best for our life. Sometimes we think we know what's best. But if we just pray about it, have faith that God is guiding us, He'll guide us to the right person at the right time. And that gives us a lot of peace. When I leave the challenges of my life in the hand of God, that gives us a lot of peace to know that it will end up in the right way at the right time.
Very well said. Thank you.
All right, so moving on, if you're asking God for something and you feel like He's not answering, we feel like this is a question that comes up a lot, and we want to get your advice on it. Like, if someone is really seeking something from God or going through a hardship and feels like there's no hope, or they're in a cycle of despair, or there's just no traction, no light at the end of the tunnel, what's your advice to them?
Sometimes I think we feel that God's not answering us because we want Him to answer us in a particular way. Sometimes non-answered prayer is answered prayer, that we don't actually realize. We may be praying for something that either is not good for us or the timing is not good for us. So I think it's good that we develop the kind of faith that we believe that every prayer is answered prayer. If I've asked something of God, then it is answered. In His way, not in my way. Yeah. Let's give an example. Simon likes a girl. He prays to God for this girl. The girl says no. That's an answered prayer. Because maybe that girl wouldn't have been suitable. He sees her as suitable. But maybe God knows she wasn't the right one for him, or it wasn't the right time for him. It's an answered prayer. I'm applying for a new job and I really, really want it, and I plead with the Lord and I don't get the job. It's answered prayer. Because probably there's a better one around the corner that's more suited. You know what I mean? So I would encourage that to have the faith that every prayer is answered prayer in God's answer. That's the one we want. We don't want our answer. We want God's answer. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. I guess going off that, one of the things that I feel that is something that's very hard for people is the concept of having kids, because I guess everyone gets married and just thinks kids is the logical next step. And there are a lot of people, I think in our community, it's a bit taboo to even talk about these kind of topics, but the concept of, people trying to have kids and they can't, and it's maybe a cycle of despair, thinking, okay, so what are we going to do? And we touched on this in our last episode a little bit, but I want to get your opinion on it, because sometimes people go down the path of IVF and there is two schools of thought. Some people say, okay, but maybe God doesn't want you to have kids, and now you're twisting His arm and saying, okay, well, we're going to medically intervene, even though if someone was sick, you medically intervene. So what's your opinion about IVF, and is it any way compromising God's will, or is it not? Should you just leave that to prayer? Or what would you say?
Well, look, I think when we talk about God's will, we need to go back to the very beginning of Genesis and God's very first command to mankind. Do you know what it was?
Multiply.
Yeah. Be fruitful and multiply.
Mm.
So God's will is to be fruitful and multiply. And so if there is a treatment like IVF that is enabling being fruitful and multiplying, then it's totally acceptable. Of course, there are requirements for that it's still within the Christian marriage. IVF is not acceptable outside of Christian marriage. For us as Christians, it's inside of a Christian marriage between a husband and a wife within those confines. And so then it becomes a treatment enabling God's will using science. So I think if we look at it that way, then IVF is definitely an acceptable and holy option because it's enabling a husband and a wife to execute God's will to be fruitful and multiply.
Next point would be more about mental health, because I think a lot of kids these days are getting exposed, like kids are getting diagnosed with anxiety or depression, and they're just, we never had things like this growing up. It was kind of like you felt sad for a second, just get over it. Like it was, but now it's like it might be the social media impact, the dopamine that you were expressing about previously. So there has been rises in suicide and depression, anxiety in younger kids. So what's your opinion about that, and how can we address that to our kids and move forward?
Yeah, look, I think you're right. I think we need to look into the root causes of these rises. And you've said an obvious one, which is social media. I think that is probably the most damaging input for our children growing up. The level of comparisons that are taking place, and the reliance on these kinds of means of communicating, being socially accepted, the negative impact that's coming in from it, the unsatisfied lives that are being developed. So I think social media is causing, I believe, a dramatic rise in children growing up feeling depressed and anxious. So I think the way we need to approach it is to protect them from these kinds of input, that we don't leave the children completely free to engage online in these kinds of things, but to nurture them in a way that they grow up to be healthy spiritually, physically, emotionally, and protecting them from all of these negative impacts on their life. Some parents, are busy and leave their children to do whatever. One child came to me in a confession session and said, my parents put me to bed and they think I'm sleeping, but I have the phone with me and it's under my cover. I'll spend the next few hours online. So, the parents think that the kid's fast asleep, but is taking all of this negative input, So we have to be, I think, vigilant to ensure that our children are protected from these kinds of things so they grow up emotionally healthy.
So Father Mark's advice on when a kid should get a smartphone is what age?
As late as possible. Yeah. As late as possible. I think, obviously as the children enter into high school, pressure mounts. My son continually tells me, I'm the only one without a phone. Yeah, I'm the only one without a phone. I'm like, surely there's someone. No, I'm the only one.
My little brother is 14. He has a MacBook. And I'm like, a MacBook? I don't even have that in uni or TAFE or a MacBook. I'm like, what can you be learning? But that's the kids now. Everything. Yeah. Before we used to go buy our books for each term, each semester. Now it's all on the laptop. I'm like, we can't get a $100 laptop? Yeah. Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So as late as possible. As late as possible to protect them.
All right, in this next segment, I want to show a few clips so that we have 2 clips to play. The first clip is about a guy that has been claiming a lot of attention online, claiming to be the legitimate pope, the successor of Simon Peter, the successor of Muhammad, the successor of Jesus, and he's kind of calling people to band with him and form this new faith. And I don't want to give him more of a platform, but I think it's important that we are aware of these kind of things because it's very easy to be misled because there are a lot of people claiming he's done these miracles and this and that. So what I'll do is I'll play it on the laptop and we can just watch it quickly and then I'll get your comment on it.
I am Abdullah, the successor of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, the successor of the Comforter Ahmed, the successor of Simon Peter, the successor of Muhammad, the successor of Jesus Christ. I am the true and legitimate Pope. I am the proof upon the Christians. I am the son of the Muslims through my father, and the son of the Christians and the Jews through my mother. I am the son of the East through my father, and the son of the West through my mother. I am like Zulkarnain, who with one horn in the East and one in the West. And I am the inheritor of all that lies between. I am more knowledgeable than any false pope, and I am appointed by name in the will of the prophets. My name is also on the tongue of Isaiah, who prophesied of the righteous servant, and he said, he will see his offspring and prolong his days.
It's deep stuff. So what are your views on something like that? And like, how do people not get confused by this?
Yeah. First of all, even just looking or listening to that makes you feel a bit uneasy. His way makes you feel a little bit intimidated. He never smiled. He didn't show any love or compassion.
Just claiming authority.
Just authority. And so when you look to Jesus, who is the true Son of God, this beautiful, compassionate, inviting, life-giving person. The truth, as I said before, it stands out. It's not hard to see it. When you put all the prophets, all the claims of the world next to each other, you find one shines, and that's Christ. It's not hard. This is not surprising. Our Lord told us that there will be many that will come that will claim to be some sort of prophet or Christ. The book of Revelation is filled with prophecies about antichrists, people that will come claiming to be successors, as this man is suggesting. So we expect these sorts of things. We're not shocked by it. We were told that it's going to happen, and it is happening. Not just him, but many other people come out claiming things. The other funny thing about this is the contradictions. How can you be a successor of the Pope, of Simon Peter, of Muhammad, of all of these prophets that have come? They are
very
not
conflicting.
It's conflicting prophets.
I think you read everything at once and was
I'll
just connect the dots. Connect for
Yeah.
that one.
So look, I wouldn't be too disturbed by these sorts of things. We expected them. They are signs of the end, as the Bible tells us. But there is no successor to Christ. Christ himself said that he himself will come again. There was no one else that needed to come after him. The prophets came before him to point to him, and he was the last one. The second coming will be his return. And that is the truth, and it's very easy to see the truth. Yeah.
Okay, great. So then the second clip I wanted to show you actually is a podcast called The Flagrant Podcast. Andrew Schultz had a guest called Wesley Huff, who is a Bible scholar and a historian. And what I find very interesting about this clip is the comedian, which is Andrew Schultz, he sees something special in Orthodoxy where he's kind of trying to push Wesley Huff on this point about how Orthodoxy seems to be like the real faith because it hasn't changed. But Wesley Huff is kind of not really buying it. And it's kind of very surprising to me because with someone with his amount of education, you would assume that he would think that was more accurate. But he leans a lot Protestant and I guess thinks that the closest thing to the church is what came maybe 1600 years later. So let's watch the clip and then maybe I'll get your comments on it as well.
And that created the division.
So just so I can understand this, Orthodox have been holding it true this entire time. Then the Catholics kind of change it up a little bit.
Well, no, it's trickier than that.
And then the thing that the Catholics create gets changed up again. And then it gets changed up again. And it gets changed up again. And it gets changed up again. But them Orthodox have been holding it true this whole time.
I mean,
it's kind of crazy how that...
Is that the right place? You got to talk to the cops.
I'm just saying.
They got Jesus' house in the Cairo So
Yeah, I was there for that.
yeah. So that's the Coptic. So they're another group.
Yeah.
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 So you got a bunch of different factions, right? But
Yeah.
but I think you have a central core which we would all adhere to approximately, but then you have differentiations in like theological disagreements. The Protestant Reformation was to reform all of that and go back to the primitive church.
The primitive church is?
Well, like what Scripture teaches,
which would be
what was
closest to?
established. I don't think it's necessarily closest to any of them. Like, I don't claim that
Feels kind of Orthodox
what
to
Jesus...
me. Feels like you don't want to admit it.
Oh, no, I'm not Orthodox.
No, this guy is like a diehard Orthodox Christian.
I just went to Turkey and I had a tour guide and he was breaking the whole thing down to me. I was like, oh, I've been lied to my whole life. The Orthodox are really the real ones.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really interesting discussion. I think it's a very important question to ask about where authenticity lies the most. Now, I think we can break it down a little bit, and also to clarify some of the language that they've used. Like you mentioned, the Coptics in Egypt, and they're another group. I wouldn't say they're another group. Mm-hmm. Coptics in Egypt are Orthodox. They're Coptic Orthodox. So really, if we just simplify it all down, you have three major groups of Christianity: Orthodox, Catholics, and Protestants. Of course, there are different denominations within and that sort of things, but three general groups of Christians, and we're all united as brothers and sisters, as Christians. We follow the same Bible. We believe in the Holy Trinity. And so Orthodox, Catholics, and Christians are all brothers and sisters in Christ with a lot of love and respect. But if we just look to how those three were formed, it gives us insight into what the question that they're asking is: where do you find the most authentic? So basically, for the first 450 years after Jesus Christ, the church was one. It was not divided. There was no Orthodox, there was no Catholic, there was no Protestant. It was just the church, the Christian church, for 450 years, undivided. In the year 450, there was a council in Chalcedon that caused the first split in the church. That, of course, there were some theological discussions that caused that split around Christology, but mostly some of these splits are sort of influenced by political factors. The emperor himself used to be part of these discussions. So you can imagine the emperor of Rome is involved in church discussions and theology. And of course, when you have the emperor involved, there are political reasons, why you may want to shift the headquarters of the church from one area like Alexandria in Egypt to Rome as the capital of the empire. You could see why an emperor would like that shift to take place. So in the year 450, you had that first schism of the church, which resulted in the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental. What's called now Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox. Yeah. Approximately 500 years later, again, Rome split off from the Eastern Orthodox. Some theological discussion fueled by politics. You have another schism that resulted in the Catholic Church. It's just the Church of Rome, which was always there, but now isolated as the Catholic Church. Another 500 years, you have Martin Luther, who was a Catholic monk, decided to start a reformation to reform the church from some of corruptions that he may have been seeing in the church at that particular point in time. Not corruptions that exist now, but corruptions at a point in time that he saw that he wanted to reform. And so he started the Reformation. The Reformation essentially stripped away church hierarchy and gave autonomy to a lot of the churches. Well, in theory, that sounds good. It resulted in thousands of different kinds of churches. But we can say that we can lump them all into the Protestant group. So what you have today is the Orthodox, the Catholic, that Protestant family. Yeah. Now, they're all beautiful, but the question is to where can we find the most authentic? Where do you find the church today as Christ had left it? And that's the question these guys are sort of trying to debate. One is suggesting, the Orthodox, they've been around the longest, so that must be them. And then the other one is saying, oh, no, it must be the Protestants because they reformed it back to what it should have been. That conversation is great and good. But the simplest way to answer it is to go and study the early church, to study that first 450 years, even the first 100 years. Because if you were to think, in which period of time would the church have been most authentic, closest to the way Jesus had left it, where would it be? The closest to Jesus.
Of course, what the apostles instituted.
If Jesus had intended the church to be a certain way, what period would that be? Right where he had left it. Before there was time to change anything. First 100 years, 200 years. The first 450 years when the church was united as one. That becomes the reference point. Simple. So any discussion now about how things should be in the church, no one has to debate it. It's very easy. We go back and study the first 450, the early church. You'll find the answer there. Was there priesthood? It was there. Was there church hierarchy? It was there. Was there the veneration of saints and the involvement of saints in our life? It was there. Was there priesthood and sacraments in the church? It was there. It's all there. It's not hard to differentiate. So we can always go back to that period as a reference point. There's a great book called Becoming Orthodox by Father Peter Gilchrist. And Father Peter Gilchrist was a Protestant pastor in America. He's passed away now. But the book tells his story where him and his mates, who were all pastors of different churches, got together one day and were asking that same question. How can we prove that the Christianity that we are practicing today is the most accurate? So they came up with the conclusion, which I just said, which is, let's go back and study the period in which it would be the most accurate, the early church. And we'll come back together and we'll share notes and we'll prove that what we're doing today is the early church, which is that guy's suggestion. So they all went off, they did their research, they all came back, and they all agreed that the faith they were living out was nothing like the early church. So they said, part 2, let's go off, study all the churches, and come back and see which church today on earth is closest to the early church. They all left, did their research, came back. They all had the same conclusion, that the Orthodox Church is the closest to what the early church looked like from their research. They then approached the Orthodox Church. They became Orthodox. Their whole congregations were baptized.
Wow.
Orthodox. And it's all written in this book called Becoming Orthodox. And so, whilst all churches are so beautiful, all following Christ, all doing remarkable work, we're all learning from each other, it's always good to go back to the early church and just have a look what was taking place.
Yeah, beautiful summary.
Now, I know you're an unbelievably busy person. I want to thank you for giving us these 2 hours of your time. However, we're not going to finish until the last question's asked, which is what we ask all of our guests. So each time we've had a different answer from, 6 different guests now. So you're our 6th guest now. So question is, what does it mean to be the salt of the earth, and how can somebody become the salt of the earth?
Oh, look, I know there are so many explanations to this beautiful verse by our Lord Jesus Christ, told us, encouraged us to be the salt of the earth. But one thing that stands out for me is that salt is such an essential part of many things in life. It's essential for food, to taste good. It's essential as a preservative. It's essential in many forms of life. And so I see Christianity as an essential part of society. I see our calling in our life to be an essential part. We shouldn't feel that our Christianity is just something that, I hold deep within my heart, but that I live it out. It's an essential part of your life. It's an essential part of this world that we're in. We need salt. We need Christians. We need Christians to stand up for the values that God has given to each of us. We need Christians to live out their calling. This world needs that. This world needs people to speak about their faith, to be bold about their belief in Jesus Christ. We need Christians to share the truth to all people. And so, as salt is needed for so many parts of life, well, this world needs salt. And Jesus said that you are the salt. You are what's needed in this world. And so let's live out our Christian faith boldly. Speak up about what we truly believe. Share the beautiful gift we have been given from Christ. You are needed. Don't sit back. Don't be passive. Contribute. Serve. Speak.
Comment.
Be bold. Comment. But not in your marriage.
Yeah, sorry. Hasn't left my mind. Forgive me.
He's taken something away.
Take something.
No, beautiful. Thank you so much, Father Mark. It's been a pleasure having you, and we look forward, hopefully, to sitting with you again soon.
Thank you so much.
And, thanks, Simon, for doing this podcast, the Salt podcast. I think it's wonderful to be able to be sharing faith with so many people. So we thank you for your efforts and your labor, and we encourage listeners to like, subscribe, share, and all that sort of stuff.
We didn't have to say it.
To spread the word more.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
Thank you.
God bless you guys.